Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Welcome back. My name is Jennifer. I'm a teacher with English in the City Prazo, and tonight we are doing Focus 810, a job interview. I want to welcome everybody tonight. My name is Jennifer, and we are live not just on our YouTube channel, but also on our Facebook page. For everyone who's just tuning in, my name is Jennifer. I'm a teacher with English in the City Prazo, and tonight we're doing Focus 810. Hi, Katya, how are you? We're doing Focus 810, a job interview. For those of you who have ever gone on a job interview, I'm sure you remember the experience very well, how stressful it might have been, possibly the preparation you needed. I'm okay, Katya. I can't complain. It's been a very, very busy day. It's been a very busy day. But I'm happy to wind down, to bring a closing to my day, doing a focus tonight. And tonight we're talking about going on a job interview. Going on job interviews has changed a lot over the past several years. I remember when you would actually go in person to organize a job interview, to make an appointment, to meet the manager, to meet the owner. Hello, Andrea. How are you tonight? Thank you for joining us. For those of you just tuning in, we're doing Focus Activity 810, a job interview. And we're live tonight, not just on YouTube, but also on our Facebook page. In my personal experience, I have had several jobs, so I've had a lot of experience going on job interviews. And it's not really something that I enjoy doing very much, especially when you know that the job you are shooting for, there's a lot of competition for it. Because sometimes if you go on a job interview, you know that maybe just a few people are looking or just a few people are applying, you have a better chance at getting the job. But as we've seen even here, sometimes in Italy and other countries, sometimes there are just a few positions and several thousands or several hundreds of people can apply for just a handful of positions. When there's that much competition for a job, you realize that your chances are slimmer to getting the job unless you are extremely, extremely qualified. And now with technology, it's not that easy anymore to get a job interview because they do so much screening beforehand that it's not as it used to be, where you would drop off a resume, they would call you on the phone and ask you to come in for a job interview. It doesn't work that way anymore. They check up on everybody via social network, via something digital. And then if they decide to call you in, they can send you a message also through those channels. It's much less personal than it used to be. So in our focus this evening, talking about going on a job interview, we're going to go over interview questions. What do they ask you when you apply for a job? And do you ask them any questions? What should you say? And what shouldn't you say at an interview? Because there is a proper etiquette. There is a proper job interview etiquette that you should follow depending on the position you're applying for. And there are many ways, unfortunately, that you can botch a job interview and be sure that they will not be calling you back. For those of you who can remember your last job interview or your first job interview, what questions do they ask you? What types of questions do they ask you when you're applying for a job? Now, mind you, you've already handed in or you've already submitted your resume. So you've given them your CV. They know your name. They've seen where you've studied. They've also had the opportunity to look at your previous job experience. So certain things they already know about you. So once you get the opportunity to go in person, what do they ask you? So Katia says that she has changed her job several times. And every time you go on a job interview, you are anxious. I am too. I'm extremely anxious because you realize that you're being put to the test. And sometimes your qualifications don't stand on their own. You have to really know how to sell yourself when you're applying for a job. And in fact, there are courses, there are tutorials that help people to go on job interviews, and they teach people how to respond to questions. So I asked you at the beginning of the focus, what questions do they ask you as a possible employee? When you were younger, Andrea, CVs were unknown. So how did you apply for a job? It was all done in person, and it was all done by speaking. Or did you have to write down any information at all about yourself? When I started looking for a job after university, I actually had my resume and a cover letter. The cover letter was basically a brief history about myself, possibly my goals, and it gave me an opportunity to describe myself, to highlight my strengths, to downplay my weaknesses. And then underneath was my resume, so they could see my professional history as well. So let's think about what types of questions they may ask us when we go on an interview. Taking a look at our first slide, it says, what questions would you ask in an interview and why? Katia says, they always had my CV, but when I went to the interview, they asked me my hobbies and how I described myself. Yes, even though they have your professional history on hand, it has become the norm to ask abstract questions, questions that possibly you think have nothing to do with the job. But they ask you these questions because depending on how you answer and also your body language, not necessarily the answer that you give, but the way you answer the question gives them an idea of the type of person that you are. So if you are on an interview, what questions would you ask in an interview and why? We're going to consider first the position of the employer. If you are hiring someone, what question would you ask them? You already have their information in front of you. As Katia said, they asked her about her hobbies and they asked her to describe herself. But if you were an employer looking for a new employee, what questions would you ask? Andrea says, the other 3 times I was introduced to the factories by the account study, that was the same for all 3. So it was very, very personal back then, meaning you would basically go and introduce yourself, or people would take you and introduce you. And you were ushered into a job. Times have certainly changed, and now, depending on the sector that you work in, applying for a job can be extremely, extremely competitive. So, if you are an employer and you are looking for a new employee, regardless of the sector that you work in, what is something you don't remember at all? Oh, Andrea, it wasn't that long ago. What question would you ask a person applying for a job for you? I mean, it's not, when you think about it, I have been in positions where I've had to interview people for jobs. Depending on the position I had, sometimes I had to conduct interviews to bring people in underneath me. And the questions were basically standard. I would ask them if they were working at the time, where they were working, if they liked their job, and if they were working and they did like their job, why were they looking for a new job with me or with the company that I was working with? And yes, Katya, I always asked them to describe, if they could name not a talent, but professional strengths. What were they definitely good at the workplace? Your last job interview was in 1990. Wow, and you had that job until you retired. Fantastic. Once upon a time, people would get a job and keep the job. I've had so many jobs, I don't even remember them all. I've changed sectors so many times. I've changed jobs within the sectors so many times. I don't even remember all of my jobs. I've had a lot. I've had a lot. But then on the other hand, you're not always in the position of the employer. You could be a possible employee. What questions would you ask if you're looking for a job? I actually had the opportunity a few months ago before the quarantine, before I went to quarantine, and I had the opportunity to interview an employee, a possible employee that wanted to come into work for September. And I was highly impressed because after we had concluded the interview, we had asked her all the questions that we had. She opened up a piece of paper and said, I have a few questions for you as well. And the questions were not about money. The questions were about how we performed on the job. And her questions were so thoughtful and well prepared that I was very impressed. It means that she was someone who understood the sector that we work in extremely well. And she also had an objective, meaning that she would choose a job based on the professional possibilities or the professional opportunities that she had. If there is no room for growth, then she wouldn't consider the job. That's okay, Katya. We're still talking about questions that we would ask as an employer or as a possible employee, because the questions are different. If you're looking for someone to hire, you might have a series of questions for them. On the other hand, if you're looking to be hired, there may be other questions that you would want to know from your possible employer. Katya said a little while ago that she was also asked to describe herself on a job interview. Let's take a look at some of these qualities, adjectives that we could use to describe ourselves. Reliable, independent, hardworking, responsible, have leadership skills, a team player, which is something we hear very often, motivated, can meet deadlines, have good IT skills, Means you work well on the computer. It's not one of my strong points. Good with people, have good people skills, and be creative. Katya says, the last interview I had, the boss told me that I was touchy and that he had understood by my face. I said goodbye. I went. The boss told you that you were touchy, meaning that you were too sensitive. Well, that doesn't seem like a very nice thing to say. It doesn't seem like a nice thing to say at all to someone, especially during an interview. So if I were to ask you now, I'm a possible employer. Yes, he does sound extremely foolish, Katya. So I'm sure you were lucky not to have accepted that job. You're very lucky indeed. So taking a look at some of these qualities that we have on the screen in front of us, which of these qualities describe you? So I ask you, describe yourself. You're on a job interview, and I'm asking you, how would you describe yourself? We have several qualities here. So this behavior, Andrea says, is quite usual in Prato for employers or prospective employers to speak that way to people, because it seems extremely forward, and I would say rude, in fact. So I'm asking you now to describe yourself. Which of these qualities would you use to describe you? If a prospective employer asks me, a touchy person takes care of his or her job the best. Yes, I agree, Andrea, because if you are sensitive, not sensible, but if you are a sensitive person, then you are also usually more precise and you want to do your job to the best of your ability. If you're not as sensitive and you really don't care as much as someone who is, then your job performance might not be as good. Thank you very much, Katya. Katya says, I think I am hardworking, reliable, and responsible. Thank you very much. And that would be a great self-description if you're on a job interview. Looking through these qualities, I'd have to say some of them I really couldn't use, not without getting myself into trouble. I am hardworking. I can be a team player, but I also feel that sometimes, depending on the circumstance, I'm better in a position of responsibility. I'm highly motivated, and I'm also good at getting people motivated. So if I'm in a position where I need to motivate a group of people in order to meet a deadline, then that's something I'm pretty good at. There is a lot of discrimination against women in the workplace. And we see that it's something that's not just common here, Andrea, but it's common worldwide. Sometimes when you go on a job interview, if the person interviewing you is a man, they feel that they can speak to you in a certain way that they definitely would not speak to another man that way. But sometimes they think that if a woman is on the interview, that you can basically speak any way you want. So for all the progress that we've made, we still need to make a lot more. So consider how you would describe yourself when you go on a job interview. And another question that possible employers may ask is, what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses? Why do you think they ask both questions? Why not just ask you, what are you really good at? and then be happy with the answer. But many times the employers don't just ask what you are good at. They ask what you think you aren't good at. Because that's also a test to see how honest you are about yourself. Katya says, yes, I know, Daniele, but sometimes they prefer women because we are more patient. Sometimes the boss prefers employees that don't do their job well, but that are football fans. I guess, well, I think both of you work in both, well, Danielle and Andrea, you have worked in the textile industry. And Katya, you work in textiles as well. Do you find that it is a male-dominated sector? Is it a male-dominated sector? I know it seems that some of the sectors that are not male-dominated are some of the sectors also that aren't as well paid, unfortunately. Unfortunately. So if someone asks you now we're not describing our personality or our characteristics. We're talking about what we are good at and what we aren't good at. So consider a possible job environment, whether you have to work with people or whether you work alone, whether you have to work as part of a group or whether your activity is more individual. Andrea says, Katya, in my experience, I had clever women colleagues and very lazy men colleagues. Well, I mean, they weren't lazy because they were men. They were just lazy because they were lazy. Did the fact that they were men have anything to do with it? Okay, and Katya adds that she works in the textile industry and she works in the accounting department in the textile industry. Ah, and you were also in the accounting department. Okay, so you were in the department of textiles. You weren't actually working with the fabric itself, but more the financial aspect of the company. So that being the case, what strengths do you need in order to work in accounting? I would be terrible in the accounting department. I would be absolutely terrible in the accounting department. I'm not very good at math. Considering also the strengths you need to work in the accounting department, what then are weaknesses that you can't afford? I work in the academic sector. I'm a teacher, as you know. And I work with all different age groups. I work with children who are very small, and I also work with adults, mature professional adults. And working with children, one of my strengths is my high energy level, not necessarily at this time of day, but in the morning and in the afternoon, I have a very high energy level. I'm able to keep the children entertained and focused on an activity at hand. But then I have to say my weaknesses at this point, one of my weaknesses is my age. Physically, it's becoming difficult to work with small children. And Kathy adds, I think one of my strengths is your patience. So the fact that you are patient by character, you have a lot of patience, means that you're able to do your job better. In many, many sectors, having patience is definitely a plus. I know in mine, working with children, we would not be able to get through the day if we weren't patient. That also goes for some adults. And also I work with children at the primary school level and the middle school level. And yes, you need a great deal of patience. Your age is your weakness as well, because you find that the older you get, even though you might become more skilled at your job, just physically, there are certain aspects of our jobs, depending on the sector where we work, that makes it just more difficult to get through the day. Working with children who are 3, 4, and 5 years old, I am sitting on the floor. I am getting up and getting down. Sometimes I'm picking them up. And physically, it's not always the easiest thing to do. So that's why I say that at this point, my age is becoming a factor. But when you work with children who are older, you're not picking them up anymore. So it's not really that important. But working at the kindergarten age, it's something to consider, whether or not you're agile enough to do certain things on the job. Why do you think that possible employers ask both questions? Why do they want to know what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses? Why do they ask you both? Because they usually do. They don't just ask you one. They ask you, what do you think your weaknesses are? In the hopes that you're going to be honest. Because how prospective employees describe themselves is very, very important. It also gives an indication of how they see themselves, and also how they possibly are going to perform on the job. The thing that you don't bear is rudeness. So if somebody is rude, either in their speech or their mannerisms, because you can possibly speak very well, but then be rude in body language. For example, if you work with people who are very, meaning they invade your personal space, that can be considered rude as well. Andrea says, my strength is the velocity of working and the honesty to get information about what I don't know instead of saying something wrong. Very, very good, Andrea. And that's very important, that the people that are going to hire you know that if you don't know something, you're not going to go ahead and do it anyway and possibly do a bad job. But you'll find out the information that you need to do the best job you can. It's a very, very important quality. Andrea also adds, my weakness is that I'm not so patient, and when I have to work, I go on without considering people around me. Okay, so you basically tune everybody out. If you have a goal, if you have a job to complete, then you are not easily distracted. Very, very good. I am highly distracted. It doesn't matter what is happening around me. I cannot concentrate if there is other activity. So that is my weakness. So now we've described ourselves. We described the qualities that we have. We've talked about our strengths and our weaknesses. And now we arrive at the question, how would others describe you? So often employers will ask you, well, what do you think of yourself? And then they'll turn around and say, well, what do other people think of you? And do we know what other people think of us? Are we willing to admit what other people think of us? Because maybe we see ourselves one way, but other people see us completely differently. I'm a very hard worker, but not everybody likes me, depending on certain situations or circumstances. Because similar to Andrea, if I have a job to do, I do it to the best of my ability. If I happen to be working with people who I don't feel are working as hard as I am, then I'm not always the best person to work with. I tell a lot of my colleagues, my hardworking colleagues, that I don't work as hard as you work. I work as hard as I can. But if you are hardworking also, then we end up doing a great job together. I think one of the most discouraging things is working in an environment where maybe people will tell you to slow down or to work less. Because if you work too hard, you make other people look bad. And that's a mentality in the United States that maybe in some sectors is common, but in most working environments, there's so much competition that a lot of people are working as hard as they possibly can. Because a lot of the jobs in the United States, you don't get a contract, you don't get a permanent contract. You get a contract that is renewable, and or the employer has the right to fire you if they don't feel you are working, if you're working as well as you should be working. They don't fire you on the spot. They have to give you notice. But it wouldn't be uncommon to get several warnings from your employer until they finally say, you know what? I've warned you several times. This is why I feel that you're not working well. And by the end of the month, we're going to have to part ways. And you'll have to look for another job. Do you live in constant fear of losing your job? No, not if you're a hard worker. But it is very competitive. Katya says, I think they trust in me, and I think that they consider me a serious person. Excellent. So you feel that people describe you or people think of you the same way you think of yourself. Very, very good. That's also an interesting thing to note, because if you consider yourself hardworking and driven and professional, but then other people think of you differently. Andrea adds, I was described as reliable, hardworking, and smart, except by one boss that was complaining about the fact that he had to sign too many documents. Well, there's always one. You can't please all the people all the time, Andrea. That's something that I've learned. Describe yourself. Can you act on your own initiative? Do you work best with others or on your own? Let's consider these two questions now on this slide. What does it mean to take the initiative? And this is a quality now that is extremely important at the workplace. Not everybody needs to be a manager. Not everyone needs to be in charge, but everyone needs to be able to complete their job. And if they run into an obstacle of some kind, they should be also to troubleshoot, to figure out a solution, and keep going to complete their task. So what does it mean to act on your own initiative? And why do you think it's important? Andrea, we don't have to make, exactly, Katya, we don't have to make everyone happy. In fact, it's impossible to make everyone happy. So what does it mean to take the initiative? It's something I use, it's a word that I use with my children quite often. If I have to tell you what to do all the time, I need you to take the initiative, not all the time, but sometimes, and know that things are going to happen without me asking you. Because if your employer knows that you can take the initiative and either start a project or solve a problem or find out information if you don't know it offhand, then they're more ready to give you more responsibility and also to trust you more in the workplace. Andrea says, yes, in fact, I told him to look for a substitute and went. Everybody's leaving their jobs. So, Andrea, you didn't stay with that job either. Do you work best with others or on your own? Here we're comparing two ways of working. You can either be a team player or you can be more independent. Do you consider yourself a team player or do you work better on your own? Yes, very, very true, Katya. Katya says to take the initiative is very important to do well, to do your job well. It is extremely important because sometimes if you take the initiative and then your employer says, "Oh, did you do that without anyone telling you to?" and you've done a good thing, then it means the next time you have an idea, chances are they'll let you follow it through. Because I say, well, the last time I didn't say anything and Katya did a fantastic job, or Andrea did something so wonderful, the next time they have an idea, it's fine with me. But often, if you're the type of person that takes the initiative, Katya says, thank you, Katya. Sometimes I am independent, but the most important decisions must be taken by the bosses. Yes, that's true. If it's an important decision, absolutely, you have to refer to your superior. But if there are decisions that you can make within your realm of responsibility, then usually our superiors are pleased when they see a good outcome. Often, however, if we take the initiative to do a job, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're working as part of a group. If you see that it's a good idea to do something a certain way and you do it and you have good results, is this because you're working in a group or because you're working by yourself? So sometimes taking the initiative means that we're better at working on our own. Because if you take the initiative and then you tell everybody else to do it, that doesn't always work, especially if you're all at the same level. At that point, you need someone who's in charge, who has a certain level of professional responsibility to step in and say, oh, I think this would be a great idea, or this should be something that we should seriously consider. I like working with other people. Unfortunately, I don't work well with all people. I have had jobs where it's been extremely, extremely difficult with my coworkers. Katya says, I work by myself. Okay, so you are not you are not a team player. No, but you're in a position where you have your own responsibilities and you're not required to work as part of a group. Very good. To take the initiative is to organize your job in the very best way. Very good, Andrea. It also means to do something without someone telling you to. And depending on the job you have, that could be viewed as a good thing or a bad thing. For example, if you work in the mailroom of a giant corporation, you work in the mailroom, so you sort the mail. And then one day you take it upon yourself to go upstairs and do something outside of your department. Even if you do it right or you do it well, they'll say, excuse me, this isn't part of your responsibility. You shouldn't be doing this at all. But if you take the initiative within your own department, you're sorting mail, and you find out a better way to do it, then they'll say, fantastic. So it's important also to recognize your professional boundaries, where you're supposed to stay, and doing the best you can within your position. And also, if you see an opportunity, of course you should take it. Now we're talking about motivation. What motivates you? Does money motivate you? You go to look for a job and they say, okay, the salary is this. Is that the motivating factor? You say, okay, I'm making enough money, I will do any job. Or are there other things that are important in order to motivate you professionally? I would have to say that room for growth is a motivational aspect. Room for growth, meaning if I accept a position and I know that I will never, ever be able to do anything more than that specific job, chances are I will not accept it. Katya says, I am motivated when there is cooperation with my boss and when I manage to solve problems. So you're motivated by your good performance. Very good. And that encourages you to work even better. I had full power, but I always advised the boss about what I thought to do. Okay, so even though Andrea was autonomous, meaning he could make decisions on his own, he still shared his thoughts, his professional thoughts, with his superior, which also shows a certain sense of humility. When you recognize the fact that there's someone above you, you know that you're capable of doing the job, but you share your ideas with them anyway. They know that you can do the job. You know that you can do the job, but as a courtesy, you share your professional thoughts with them. So Katya is motivated by the fact that she does her job well. I am motivated by the fact that I can evolve and grow in my job. And that brings us to the next question. Where do you see yourself in 10 years' time? If you have that particular job where you do the same thing day after day after day, year after year after year, knowing that in 10 years you're going to be doing the same exact thing that you were doing before, is that motivating? Or if you look at your job and you realize, in 10 years' time, I could possibly have a different position, or the position that I have, possibly I can change it to make it more diversified. These are also things to consider. In 10 years' time, I hope, oh my goodness, in 10 years' time, I'll be almost 60. In 10 years' time, I hope I'll be winding down on my professional career, but I don't think that's going to happen. I'm never going to be able to retire. Andrea says, I'm motivated by a familiar atmosphere and good cooperation with the boss and the other colleagues. Okay, so if you work in a friendly environment, then you are motivated. And that is very, very important. Kathy says, in 10 years' time, I hope to be retired. I know. Do you think we'll ever be able to retire, Kathy? I don't know. I don't think I'm ever going to be able to retire. I'm going to be 120 years old and I'll still be singing songs to kindergarten children, most likely. But the environment we work in is extremely... Andrea! In 10 years' time, would you stop it? You're going to be an English teacher in 10 years' time. You're going to be teaching me English. Okay, so Katya, you're 56. So in 10 years, yes, you'll be at the age where you'd like to be retired. No, you're a little bit older than me then. So I still have some time. But as I was saying, is that the environment that we work in is extremely important. I remember having a job where literally, I would get palpitations when I went to work in the morning. It was a horrible atmosphere to work in, and I literally hated going to work. It was a horrible feeling. It was a horrible feeling, but good luck, Kathy. I keep my fingers crossed out. Listen, we're all going to stop working someday. Someday we're all going to stop working. But the job that I had was so hideous The environment was so stressful that I hated going to work. And the sad thing was, I needed the job. I really, really needed the job. So I did everything I could to keep the job because I really, really needed to work. And then as soon as I found another job, I left. And they were devastated because they actually liked me working there. But I hated going to work every single day. I hated it. I hated it. And I was so happy when I got a new job. So in 10 years' time, if we're highly motivated, Katya will be retired. Andrea will be teaching English. And I don't know where I'm going to be. I have no idea where I'm going to be in 10 years' time. Really, it's a fantastic experience to be retired. My mother loves being retired. She loves being retired. I think it's a shame that you have to spend so much of your life working. I think the work, your professional life should balance your personal life, meaning instead of working 12 hours a day, everybody should work maybe 5 or 6. This way you have time with your family, you have time for yourself, you have time to work, and everybody should work just a little bit. Talk about a time you had to deal with a difficult situation at work. We've talked about our difficult situations at work. Let's see what the next question is. Simulate an interview. Oh, and these are the same questions that we just went over. Okay, here is an excellent question. You can't see the questions, but I can. If you have a job that is stressful. Katya says you hate your job now. You hate your job too. I don't hate my job now, but I had a job that I absolutely hated. Oh, and not because the job itself. I liked the job that I was doing, but the atmosphere was so toxic that I hated going to work. Because Andrea was saying that he's motivated when the atmosphere is positive, when the people are happy. That's a motivating factor when you go to work. When you go to work, and not necessarily you have to have a great time and laugh all day long with your workmates. No, but it should be a professionally stimulating, pleasant environment. And when it isn't, you can feel less motivated, as I felt with that terrible, terrible job that I wish I could just block from my memory. Oh, you don't like the atmosphere at your job. That makes it so difficult because we spend more time at work than we do with other people. We spend so much time at work that if we're in an environment that isn't pleasant for us, you love your job, but you don't like the atmosphere. And that brings us to a very important question. I understand, but it depends on this period. Think about the trips you'll be able to do. To Katya, that eventually when she's retired, she'll be taking lots and lots of trips. Yes, and also if the harder we work, the more money we can put aside. In the eventuality that we can travel a little bit more in the future. How do you handle stress? If you have a job that you enjoy, but there are periods where it is more stressful, how do you handle the stress at work? Do you go home and kick the dog? Do you smoke? Do you go home and maybe break something? Do you drive very fast? Or are you athletic and you work out the stress? Which is a very, very good thing to do. For those of us who aren't as athletic and mobile like me, I don't move around very much. So when I have high periods of stress at work, it's very, very difficult. You started to run. Good girl, Katya. Excellent. So because of the stress at work, you started running. And I hear that running is fantastic for stress. When I was younger, when I was in the States, I used to go to the gym and I did cycling, I did spin classes. That's what I did. I used to do spin classes. And we would do the really intense spin classes where the lights would be off and the music would be pumping and you'd be up and down, up and down, up and down on the spin bikes. And I remember being very relaxed during those few months because you got rid of all the stress. I was sleeping better. I was feeling better, so I was eating more healthily. Before the COVID, you went to the gym every day. I would like to go to the gym every day, Katya. I really would. I just don't have the time. I don't have the time. And my schedule is so fluctuating that even I don't have the same amount of time every day to go to the gym and come home and do the things in the house and get ready for the next day at work. It's not very easy to balance everything. We mentioned before at the beginning of our focus that sometimes the prospective employers will throw you a curveball. What's a curveball? A curveball is an unusual question. I know you haven't got children, Katya. Do you want one of mine? You can have two. I'll give you two. Yes, Katya has two friends, me and Andrea. And if you want some kids, you can have some of mine. I have too many. I have too many children. I don't know where they all came from. They just came out of nowhere. So what's a curveball? A curveball is an unusual question that is difficult to answer. And many times now, prospective employers will throw a curveball during an interview just to see what you say. What's an example of a curveball? If you were an animal, what animal would you be? If you had a superpower, what would you have and why? In the news story of your life, what would the headline be? How can you measure 4 liters using only 3 liters and a 5-liter jug? Andrea, I cannot be your daughter. I'm not that young. I'm not that young. Going back to curveballs, notice that Katya did not answer my question if she wanted some of my children. She completely just passed right over that. And she said, thank you, Andrea, because you and Jennifer are my friends. And yes, we are. She completely ignored my offer. So going back to curveballs, we're getting towards the end of our focus. This was a very intimate focus this evening. It was very intimate. It's very nice talking about job interviews. Are curveballs a good idea, or do you think they're completely foolish? We don't have time to go over these curveballs and answer them, but do you think they are necessary during an interview? Is it a good idea to ask a curveball question? What do you think? I think depending on the job, a curveball question is a very good idea, especially questions that are ridiculous, like the one with the superpowers. Or if you could be any animal, which animal would you be? Because it doesn't matter which animal they decide to be, if they decide to be an eagle or a lion or a koala or a whale. No, that's not the point. It's important that how quickly they answer, or if they choose not to answer. That gives an indication on the type of person that they are. or at least how fast they are thinking on their feet. And also, if you could have a superpower, which superpower would you have? If I could have any superpower in the world, that's a nice question. I hmm, I think everybody would fly, but I'm afraid of heights, so I wouldn't fly. What is the purpose to ask this kind of question? Good question, Katya. In fact, that's what I asked you. Why do they ask these questions? Andrea, why do you think they ask these questions? I think often it's a test to see how quickly you come up with a response. It also gives them an idea of how imaginative you are, especially if you can back up your question with a reason, back up your answer with a reason. Some distorted psychological issue. No, Andrea, no, it isn't. For example, if I ask you, if you could be any animal, which animal would you be? And you say, well, I'd like to be a kitty cat. Why? Because I like kitty cats. Or you say, well, I'd like to be a cat. Why? Because I like the idea of being able to move around and nobody hearing where I'm going. It's still a cat. But the fact that you back up your answer with the reason and also the quickness with which you come up with an answer gives an indication of how maybe you would perform in a certain job. I don't know if I don't think there could be one headline from my life in the newspaper. So Kathy said, what is the purpose to ask these questions? It's to see how we think, to see how we think. And in the world we live in nowadays, the jobs that people are applying for aren't necessarily crafty jobs. People aren't learning how to hammer a nail or to saw a piece of wood or to build something or to make something where you have to rely on tactile skill. A lot of the jobs nowadays are mental jobs. They're thinking jobs where you sell, where you promote, where you buy, where you motivate. How many people have become motivational speakers or influencers on the social network? Because these are the jobs right now that people are creating, that people are going for. And questions like this demonstrate pretty much how elastic your imagination is and how convincing you can be. You guys, I'd like to be a little mosquito to spy on Jennifer and see how lazy she is, always sunbathing. Yes. When I'm not doing focuses online, I lay on the floor. I don't do anything else. I do a focus with everybody and I'm say, oh, we are live on YouTube and on our Facebook page. And when I'm done, I lay on the floor. Katya says, you don't like these interview questions. You would prefer to lose the job. Katya, well, Katya, we're almost at the end of our careers anyway. So luckily, we're not applying for jobs where they ask these questions because these are the new types of questions that they ask. Question 4, how can you measure 4 liters using only a 3-liter and a 5-liter jug? I would measure 4 liters in the 5-liter and not even use the 3-liter jug. That's what I would do. For example, if the train is traveling at 130 kilometers an hour from point A to point B, what is Frank eating for lunch? It doesn't make any sense. But the fact that people will take the time to actually consider it is somewhat interesting. All right, listen, we've come to the end of our focus. It's been very entertaining and extremely thoughtful and even cathartic in a sense, talking about interview questions, how we would answer if we were the employer, if we were the employee. and certain things to consider. Thankfully, the majority of us, well, Andrea is retired. Katya is towards the end of her career, and I am also moving in the same direction. So luckily, we won't have too many more opportunities in which we have to go on job interviews, thank goodness, because I hate job interviews. But I want to thank everyone for tuning in tonight. Thank you, Katya. Thank you, Andrea. It was a very nice, intimate, focused activity this evening. Remember that we're live. English in the City is live every day on YouTube and on our Facebook page. Thank you guys so much for joining me. If you hadn't joined me, I would have been alone. So have a great evening. Rest well. And I will see you all back here next time. Okay, you guys, have a great night, and I'll see you soon.